IT Audit.
Chief Bliss, you want to start this one?
Yep. All right, Madam Chairman, members of the board, I have the presentation up here on the same screen. This presentation was put together by the audit company. It's not real long. Excuse me. I'm going to go through it and provide some clarification, additional information to what they've included.
Do you want me to work that thing, or does it work? Oh.
So we start with just a quick review of the purpose. We started this process in the fall of last year, and the idea was that we need to examine the existing state of our IT, determine what its status was, provide recommendations for improvement, and just make sure we knew what we had. There were a bunch of areas we wanted to look at that included the IT governance, basically the oversight of the system, service levels to our customers, which are internal. And the next three are kind of grouped together. We have IT skill levels, workload and capacity, and staffing structure. And that all gets to, do we have the right setup with our personnel to address the needs that we have? The policy coverage, and really that's about the services we're providing to the internal customers, the equipment performance, and then how are we managing our outsource resources. And that ends up being a pretty big one, which I'll get into here in a little bit more in a few slides. So we had quite a few findings, and this is not, I don't think, a big surprise for us, because that's why we felt like we needed the audit to begin with, was we had some questions. Are we doing things the way we should be? And so we had a lot of suggestions from the auditors. One of the big ones was that they felt we had some issues with our risk analysis process, and that means what's the risk to your system, and what are you going to do if there's a problem? So we're gonna come back to that in a few slides here again also. The workload and impact, the answer to do we have enough people, do we have the right skill sets, the answer to that is no. We're overloading the people we have, and we need to look at some other areas of skill in the people we employ. So that gets to the skill level and competence. It's not that the people we have are unable to do their job, it's that their specialty is in radio, and they know some things about IT. And what we need to do is add to that group some people that their specialty is IT. Outsourced tolerance study. This gets to using the third party. So the big thing with this is when we began our IT infrastructure, when I started about 25 years ago, we had a computer in each station and we had a couple in the office. And that was it. So as we started expanding, we hired a company to help us manage our IT structure, and we basically said, we want to hire you to be our IT provider. And that was okay when we were smaller, but we are a whole lot bigger, and we're still using the same approach. And what the auditors pointed out is, you need to reverse that relationship. You need to be providing your IT help, and you need to go to a third party occasionally when you have a job or a project or a problem that is outside your internal abilities. So when we're talking about the outsourced tolerancing and then the management of the third party, there are a lot of questions asked, but that's the big one. The big issue is we are still managing our IT system as if we were a small organization, and we need to turn that around. Policies and SOGs, this goes along kind of with what I just said. As we've grown, we have not expanded the policies and SOGs to include our IT system. And the infrastructure and equipment performance needs to have more attention. Overall, the IT auditors were complimentary about architecture on a large scale, but they said we really need to improve our maintenance processes, keeping up what we have. So one of their recommendations was to reorganize the IT division a little bit. And really, it wasn't about changing the responsibilities we had, it was about adding 2 positions. So they suggested that we need to rehire the manager position, and then we need to add an engineer position specific to IT. We already have 2 people that know a lot about radio. What we need is the IT engineer. And we also need an entry-level position that handles our IT service requests internally. Our 2 existing employees handle that as much as they can at the levels that they have, and then we outsource a lot of that to our third party. And this gets to bringing our IT in-house and getting more control over our services. We hire a person who can, that's their job. That's what they're here to do. And if they can't take care of it, maybe the IT engineer can't. If they can't, possibly the manager can. But we don't go to the outside source until we use our internal resources. All right, this diagram is kind of a mess to show on a PowerPoint slide, but it really gets to the service level process that the auditors have suggested. And when you really sit down and work through it, it's sort of, it should be intuitive on how people submit their requests for services, how those requests are reviewed and then addressed, and then the feedback is provided to the customer that asked for help about what was wrong and what was done to fix it. Or if it's a change that needs to occur, it's not a problem with a piece of equipment, but it's a change in process, that the discussion is held with the users and everybody is involved in making that change. So this is not a process that we have documented, and it's not a process that we've been using very well in previous years. So we're going to have to really focus on developing that process and really developing a culture within our IT personnel on the customer service side. I think we've done a lot better in the last few months, but we've got a ways to go. So, bottom line, these are the 5 things that the auditor said you got to address. The first one right up there at the top is the disaster recovery and backup strategy. This is a big issue. We have a form of backups, but it is a form that is highly vulnerable. In the event that we needed the backup, whatever destroyed the original may also destroy the backup based on how our system is constructed right now. So we're going to need to address this pretty quickly. We've already talked with a couple outside vendors on how to approach this, but because we've also been moving forward with hiring of the manager, we're going to probably wait until we hire that manager to come in and review. The process for installing a new backup system did not go as quickly as we thought it might, so that we're going to wait a little bit here to get another opinion. But it is definitely something that we have to build. That it will include an off-site system and possibly a system that has some level of backup in the cloud. But ultimately, what we really want is a failover system, so that if the email server goes down, for instance, the backup picks up immediately and the end user doesn't notice the change while we fix the primary. Management of outsourced IT services needs to be addressed. And again, this gets to what I've already talked about in terms of changing our approach to how we use outsourced services. I mentioned the maintenance. We have a decent structure, but we need to improve our ability to keep it up. The IT service delivery tools and training process, this gets to the customer service aspect. And then the organizational structure, you saw the chart. So that's the end of the presentation, along with my explanation. Are there questions?
One moment, there is. First of all, thanks for being open to going through an audit. It's not always fun to have someone come in from the outside and tell you all the things you're doing wrong. So it's great that we went through that process and revealed some things. Out of those 5 recommendations that are posted there, how many of them were anticipated and budgeted for already?
I would say that there are portions that were anticipated and budgeted, but I can't tell you that the entirety of any one of them was voted. So for instance, the IT organizational structure, we had some idea that we were understaffed. We were not completely sure what positions we needed. So we did not approach the board in the last budgeting process for those positions. So we may be able to do some things with the entry-level IT service position with what we have budgeted. But for instance, the IT engineer is not a budgeted position at all. There's really not a chance that we'll be able to deal with that in this budget structure. So that will probably be something we'll be talking about in the next budget. The backup system, on the other hand, was a big surprise because I had been given some information that we had some things that we don't. So, like I said, it's a bit of a mix.
Okay, thanks.
Chief, so your idea about bringing in additional personnel, but granted, you just said that we don't have it in this budget cycle for the engineer, but
That's right.
we might be able to finesse, an entry-level position based on need. Is the idea behind that to lower our dependency on a third party? Would it be a direct
Yeah.
we'll be able to recoup that, at least just switch where we're spending the dollars and be able to control our own destiny?
There's 2 parts to that. So number one, absolutely, we need to be more in control of our own system. Now, we believe we may be able to lower our costs to the vendor, the third-party vendor, by hiring internally. But we have to be a little careful with that assumption because we have a lot of workload right now because we have been understaffed. So are we going to see that savings right away? I'm not sure that we will. So we'll have to kind of work with that and see what we can do.
So you see a ramp up to getting us out of the weeds?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and then hopefully with a experienced IT manager being able to guide the helm at that point to be able to assess what we need in the future.
And that's really the first step, is to get the IT manager on board, somebody who has experience with running systems like we have. And we're in the interviewing process, and we have interviewed people with that experience. So I really have some pretty positive thoughts about getting that person in place and coming up with some pretty concrete plans about how to address this.
Okay. Excellent. Anyone else have any questions?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I want to commend Scott and his staff for all the work they did working with the auditing company, because this was not an easy task. It was, there was a lot of workload required to go through this audit with the auditing firm. And it was tough at times to hear the things that we were told were in place and finding out that they weren't. So when we say, when Chief Bliss says we may not save money up front, he's right, because one, we aren't staffed properly. Two, we're behind in a lot of ways. The architecture is great, but architecture is only good if you keep it up, as Director Zurcher can attest to, and I know a number of you are familiar with IT. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get it together. We're hoping to reassess our budget where we are closer to January, February timeframe to see if that entry-level position is something that we can pull off this fiscal year, but towards the end of the fiscal year. Get the tech manager in, let that person get their feet underneath them, figure some things out, and then look at that position. I do have every intention of coming back to the board in the next fiscal year looking at that network engineer position. I mean, if we look at what we've had to spend since our tech manager is no longer employed with us, and not because he's gone, but things that were not right that we found after he left, including a voice over IP system that was failing and had to be replaced. Those things wouldn't happen if we had an appropriate staff here. And I actually spoke with Larry Tarkowski at the town, and you know, Prescott Valley is very conservative in their approach to how many employees they have. And you know, I explained to him that what we were looking at for our IT structure, and he said, you know what, that's what we have in Prescott Valley. It works out very well. You know, you have these 3 basic positions, and then bigger projects you go out. But the problem for our organization is when you put all your eggs in one basket with an outside vendor and something happens and you need to replace that vendor, or that vendor goes out of business, whatever it is, you end up with serious problems, and we just can't put this organization in that position. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I have a question for clarity.
Yes, ma'am.
I've heard Chief Bliss and you also said it, and that is, we've been told but not identified. So have we been misled regarding our current status before we had this audit that we were suspect for?
One of the reasons we wanted to have the audit is that we were not comfortable with the information we were receiving, and we needed an outside independent third party to take a look and tell us what we really had in place. And you know, again, some of what Chief Bliss had been provided as far as information was contrary to what we actually have in place.
And that information was from internal, not external, so it's not a contractor issue.
That's correct. It was an internal employee that's no longer here.
So in the future, with the positions that we're looking at and the restructuring of that department, will we be putting in safeguards, so to speak, from a transparency perspective, so that we're not caught in this situation again?
Yes, ma'am. Our recommendation as an industry standard, really, talking to Yavapai College and some others, is that you do an internal audit every approximately 3 years on your IT systems. Yavapai College, by state statute, has to do it every year. The subsequent IT audits won't have to be as in-depth as this one was, but by budgeting that every few years to do an IT audit, it's going to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and the information we're receiving is correct. Checks and balance, no different than the financial audit Chief Tharp is going to talk to us about. We think that that is a direction we need to go.
Okay, well, I think it's important from a cybersecurity standpoint that we make sure that we do this as a regulatory compliance professional. I would like to see something on a very small level for a spot audits on a more regular basis, and then go to the full-blown, probably every 3rd year, like you said, but every year we need to do something. We can't just not do something every 3rd year.
Right, and we're looking to get a tech manager in place. We were fortunate to have a partnership with Yavapai County, Yavapai College, and the city of Prescott. They sent their IT directors here to act as the first panel for interviews, because we just don't have the expertise internally to understand what they're saying when it comes to tech. And so they gave us some really good recommendations. Chief Bliss, Patty, and Dave Lake from our tech division were included in that so that they could hear and Patty could direct things. So we have follow-up interviews tomorrow, and then Chief's interviews on Thursday, as long as the board tomorrow moves people forward.
Excellent.
So,
Okay, that's all I have. Anybody else? All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you, gentlemen.